Okay, at this time, I would like to have Mr. Brad Underwood, Director of Corporate Planning and Analysis, give us his, hopefully his final update on the rate rider schedule number 500 for solar.
Yeah, thank you, Director McGuire. Thank you to the board. And I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the community solar team. It's a large team, and I get to speak on their behalf today, specifically from a rate-making perspective. So just grateful to do that, just pleased to do that. A lot of folks really excited here about the project and excited to see it move forward with your approval. So kind of starting from the top here today, the objective we have with the community solar program is we want to provide a solar option. We want to grow our products and services offerings for our customer owners related to solar. We see that demand there, and we want to meet that demand in a way that hopefully pleases them. We also need to do that within a 5-year no general rate increase. So we are operating under some constraints, as many and all of you are aware of, and so we want to be mindful of those constraints as we build the program. And then obviously we want to continue to work towards our mission to be affordable, reliable, and environmentally sensitive. And so we feel like a community solar project has a very meaningful role to play within our accomplishment of that mission. As we reflect on the directives that we operate under, there's a handful that we feel are very, very important to this effort. The first one, SD1, obviously related to our strategic foundation. We want to be the district that leads the way, and we feel like solar is a part of our future, and as we lead the way, we want to make sure we incorporate that accordingly. We also want to exemplify fiscal, social, and environmental responsibility, as I read our mission statement earlier on the previous slide. In regards to SD2 competitive rates, we like to have an elective program that is priced at the market value and pass along those costs and those market benefits to those who participate. We feel like that's consistent with rate-making principles, and we'll see those here on the next slide as we go through this. Regarding SD5 and customer satisfaction, to the demand I mentioned earlier from a growing segment of our customer base, to see this kind of product stood up and brought forward, we think that'll contribute meaningfully to our customer satisfaction scores. We'd like to continue to keep those high and drive those higher if at all possible. And then in addition, finally, the SD13 stakeholder outreach and engagement. We wanted to provide meaningful ways for customer owners to participate in the process and to provide feedback. And so we tried to do that out of the gate. We brought in kind of a small panel of community experts who really had a knowledge of this kind of technology, who really had knowledge of these kind of programs, and we sat down with them early on to collect their feedback on what they thought something like this should look like. So real quick, a little bit of a deeper dive related to Strategic Directive 2 competitive rates. A couple of bullet points we wanted to highlight within that directive. We want to maintain fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory rates as stated in Nebraska Statute 70, Tax 655, and that really governs sort of any comprehensive rate making for us as a utility, and so we want to stay true to that expectation the state's placed on us. We also want to equitably assign costs across and within customer classes. We want to pursue a rate process and structure changes to reflect the cost of energy when it is used. We also want to pursue flexibility and options for those customers who desire those. And in addition, ease of understanding. And when we get into the stakeholder feedback that the team got, we focused in really hard in a couple of really specific areas to kind of grow the easiness of the understanding of the program. We can talk more about that in a few slides. Real quick, kind of going back to the beginning when we kind of brought that early stakeholder group in, we kind of looked around at the different ways that these programs had been structured kind of locally and nationally. So we just want to kind of spend a minute kind of highlighting a couple of those programs. The first one that you see up there kind of in the top left box of that chart is the embedded cost of generation. Okay. And kind of a method overview is if we were to pursue that logic of the pricing, it would assume equal capacity credit to baseload units. And so a lot of times what happens is sometimes solar does not produce necessarily in the exact times that you need it to, unlike a baseload unit that we would term dispatchable that you can turn off and on command. So just a real quick overview of that. Relative to the full retail rate, this assumes all the benefits to reducing load in a sense that the load just goes away. So kind of the analogy here is in regards to the full retail rate, there's a customer charge, there's a distribution charge, there's a transmission charge, there's a production capacity charge. And for those people that are interested in a full retail rate methodology, if you do that, the implication is that customer is not using those other services. And we would say that they most likely are. And so that was one of the observations we had when reviewing the full retail rate. Value of solar is very popular. It gets a lot of press and arguably for good reason. But one of the things that we notice with value of solar is not necessarily finding a formula for value of solar, but finding a consistent formula that is widely accepted. And that really is kind of one of the observations we took from that is you can get a lot of different formulas and you can get a lot of different values and interpretations. And so finally, kind of in the bottom left of the table there, you see the market-based rate. Kind of the overview of that was that we would let market values kind of flow back to the participants in addition to cost. And this seemed to be a very equitable way to build a program. And so this is the pricing methodology that we pursued. Real quick, another kind of a little bit deeper dive into the market-based rate. So the rate is proposed around a formula that has a strong correlation with the Southwest Power Pool. And so as we're working on the rate and we're proposing a rate, there's kind of a value of energy and a value of capacity as defined by the market. And so that's really kind of the backbone that the pricing methodology kind of hinges on. In addition to that, it's sort of the same valuation. It is the same valuation that the other assets on the kind of this what we would call the supply side, the other generators are subject to. They're subject to market values and those sorts of things. And so we felt like it was very consistent in how we looked at all the generators within OPPD's portfolio. And so we were pleased with the consistency there. Thinking more down the road into the future and as the energy transformation continues to happen, we feel like the principles in the rate are very conducive to environments of wider spread distributed energy resource adoption. So as people produce more of their own energy, and that environment continues to grow, how are those sorts of things priced and how do those sorts of things interact in light of what's going on in the market? So as we try and lead the way that we power the future, we were very pleased with what this rate formula looks like 3, 5, 10 years down the road, or as pleased as we could be without realizing that future today. The rate is also portable, meaning within the service territory you can relocate your primary residence, or if you're a commercial customer you can relocate your business, and as long as you're on a retail rate, the community solar participation follows you. So we thought that would be very convenient for customer owners who are interested in participating. And then in addition, we took kind of that body of work and we submitted it to the board's rate consultant, Brad, and they agreed that the methodology is compliant with reasonable and prudent rate-making principles, otherwise known as fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. So real quick, if we could give a quick overview of how the formula works. At the top there, you see community solar charge, and you see the components that make up that charge. So there's a market-based value of solar times the subscription level. So customers can elect to participate at a level that pleases them, whatever that level may be. And so we would define the subscription level as the quantity of community solar shares. And we would describe a community solar share as 100 kilowatts per month. Just as a barometer, if you're wondering, well, what does 100 kilowatt hours per month mean? Generally speaking, the average residential customer, it's about 10% of their load. So if you like to think in terms of percentages, it's about 10%. If you like to think in just 100 kilowatts per month, if that's easier, that they're essentially the same. And then the market-based value of solar, we would calculate is the cost of the interconnected purchase power agreement for the community solar asset, less the market value of the energy and the market value of capacity that asset receives. And so transitioning to market research and stakeholder engagement, kind of from the qualitative lens to begin with, some of those community experts that we brought in for early involvement, they described a program that was simple, that was transparent, and that was available to all customers. They really prioritized those attributes of a program. They said that the size of the program or the facility wasn't terribly important to them or critical to them. And as far as the visibility, do you want to see it? Are you okay not seeing it? They said it could be physical or virtual. And they also said that whatever the program looks like, affordability and education would be very important to them. And then as we kind of progressed into other areas of stakeholder outreach, we went on to the power panel, and we talked about program funding, and the participants were kind of split between funding by program participants or all customers. In addition to, and there'll be a little bit more detail of that on the quantitative slide on the next slide, but program participant, kind of the demographics of those is generally environmental supporters as well as people who are maybe higher income or maybe have a little bit more disposable income. So that's what we saw from the power panel. And then kind of going into the quantitative piece, we saw some price inelasticity across various solar options. So as we tested these options, a lot of the quantitative feedback came back that said, really, if the price increases a little bit, it doesn't affect participation a whole lot. If it decreases a little bit, it doesn't really affect it a whole lot. And we also saw that they preferred a pay-as-you-go model. And so we noted that as we went through. Participation terms were not critical, and physical location of the facility was also not critical. And then just to kind of close the point on the program funding, we're kind of saying it was split, but 53% of the program participants, 53% of the participants in the research said that program participants should pay for the program, and then kind of knocking down a little bit, 39% said all customers should pay for it. So we saw over half, 53% say that the program participants should pay for the cost of the elective program if they want to participate in it. And real quick, regarding OPPD listens, we've seen this as a very effective stakeholder outreach tool for us in recent years. And so we had a number of media contacts. We'd listed them up on the slide. Midwest Energy News reached out, Omaha Public Radio, KIOS, and we also saw a little bit over half a dozen. We had about 7 articles published on the proposed community solar program, and we internally created 2 OPPD press releases to try and increase the awareness of what the district was working on. As far as website, we used Google Analytics, and we had 616 page views and 520 unique page views. So we saw pretty good traffic on the Google Analytics piece. And then we also solicited customer comments, so people can go online, or they could call. The preferred method is online, but we saw 16 customer comments, 13 via OPPD listens, and 3 were emails directed to our corporate secretary or the board. And we've got Twitter statistics: 225 mentioned, 117 tweets. And then Facebook also experienced some meaningful traffic. About 5,800 accounts were reached. So I think we had some good statistics there from a media contact perspective. One of the changes or kind of the refinements of the program that we made maybe from last month to this month was kind of this shares approach. And the shares approach was really born out of the customer feedback regarding ease of understanding. And so when we kind of tested this with our community experts and internally in the organization as well, it was very, very popular. So we wanted to incorporate kind of a share program into the offering. And so one share of community solar, I mentioned this earlier, equates to approximately 100 kilowatt hours per month. And some of the specific benefits of the share structure was an ease of understanding. It also facilitates the tracking of the asset a little bit easier for us when we allocate shares out in blocks of 100 kilowatt hours. The volume of the participation is predictable, and we'll get into what that looks like here in a couple slides, but it just increases the predictability a little bit from a bill perspective. And then it allowed customers to kind of draw an analogy, I think, in our opinion, where if you go into a situation and you're going to do it yourself, you're going to put the panels in your yard or on top of your home, you think about your load, and then you think about how much of this generator do I want to offset my load. And so you kind of think about, we would call it nameplate, but the size of the panels. And we thought the size of the shares would be very sort of comparable to how people would think about it on a do-it-yourself. So if I use 1,000 kilowatt hours a month and a share is 100 kilowatt hours, it's easy for me to kind of do that math, or it might be easier for a participant to do that math. I can guarantee it's easier for me to do the math, but. In addition to that, the account executives and the call center representatives would be obviously willing and available to educate participants if they have programs. This is kind of where we're putting a little foot into sort of program development, and today we're here from a rates perspective, but just kind of on the go forward. We would have the customer service folks who are working on that program really incorporate this kind of education that the stakeholders told us they wanted into our program materials. The current rate rider does request a commitment length, and so as you can see on the slide, it would be proposed 5 years continuous participation for residential customers, 10 years of continuous participation for commercial, and 20 years for industrial. A lot of the industrial customers they have, especially when you see 261M there, they have some ways and means of getting their own renewables. So, I don't know that we would necessarily expect to see a whole lot of participation, especially with the size of those customers, but we did want to make sure that it was available to all customers based on some of that early stakeholder feedback the team received. Now we're going to spend a couple slides just trying to share some information on what we would expect sort of the customer participant to see from a billing perspective. So real quick, we have sort of two perspectives, and I'm going to use my pointer here, but on the customer bill participant, that's kind of that third column from the left. That would be the participant that is potentially thinking about enrolling in the program and what they would see from a billing perspective. And then a non-participant is on the far right. I do want to note that the FPPA is not shown here, so we're really trying to drive some clarity into what the customer should expect. So to a certain extent, we're trying to simplify this image a little bit. So if you're familiar with the FPPA and you're more familiar with your rate, it's kind of in that 8.5 cent charge there that you see on the energy charge line under the calculation line header. So real quick. The energy charge, each customer in this example would use 1,000 kilowatt hours, which, like I mentioned earlier, is our average customer use, residential customer use. And then for the customer that elects to participate at a one share participation levels, which would be 10% of their monthly load, we think that'll be about a $2 impact on the bill. And so there's a few kind of moving parts to that $2. We're still trying to finalize that, so we want to make sure that we're clear this is representative, and we've got a little bit of work to do before we can accurately message that to participants or people who are interested. But we did want to give a perspective for clarity's sake on what that might look like. One quick note that you'll see on the top of the slide is we, in our customer feedback, we did get some kind of comments on the ITCs, the investment tax credits, and principally speaking, the ITC would allow the developer to lower their PPA offer price. So customers who participate in the program or who may want to participate in the program would reap that ITC benefit via a lower PPA price. And that's the same thing we do with our current wind facilities, and we've seen that work well. And then here's another look. So all we did here is we took a monthly bill and we tried to extrapolate it over the sample year. So just a couple of quick notes on this. The kilowatt hours across the top you can see is a volumetric measure of customers' usage, and you would expect in the summer months your usage would go up as you run your air conditioner and you run other electronics more. And then the service charge is shown there, and then the energy charge is kind of that 8.5 cents that we mentioned earlier. And then you see the solar charge. And I think the important thing, if I was not familiar with this program, I would note that it's flat. And so as people budget, as they plan for expenses, we want them to understand that the proposed program would have a flat solar participation fee incorporated into it that we expect to be updated annually, like any of our or most of our other rates outside of the 5-year general rate freeze. So there's just an annual look for those who might like to see that. Related to next steps, so we would ask for your approval on the rate rider today, and then we would continue the review of the RFP responses that we have gotten regarding the community solar project. We want to continue developing the program details and the marketing plan, like I had mentioned earlier. We also want to stay engaged with the stakeholders, so we want them to kind of step through this with us to make sure that if they have any feedback as we go to kind of complete program details, they have an ability to give that to us and for us to kind of try and incorporate as much of that feedback as we can. And then we would like to bring back to the board the award of the purchase power agreement. So once that is awarded, we would bring that back for disclosure to you. And then obviously when we've refined the program details, we would also bring back those program details so make sure you could see it.